The Virgin Spring is a revenge story that tackles anger, guilt, and struggling with faith. Let's discuss the Ingmar Bergman picture that would go on to inspire exploitation films like The Last House on the Left. Why, hello! I didn't see you there. Welcome, everyone, to Collector's Cut, the collection, a movie podcast that we do monthly. Is a sister show to our regular weekly show, The Collector's Cut. But on this show, we are only reviewing Criterion Collection movies. And on this episode, we are looking at Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, our first Bergman, which, you know, it's only episode 3, so it makes sense. It's only the first one. But we're going to get into this. Now, unlike the last 2 episodes we did of this, Seven Samurai and Wages of Fear, I had not seen this one before. I've seen other Bergman, but I thought I'll shake it up a little bit for myself. I'm going to pick one that I've not watched yet, and we're going to get into it. We'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. This is a Swedish film from 1960, as previously mentioned, directed by Ingmar Bergman. And what I will say, now we're in spoiler free, but what I will say is that just before I watched it, and I mean minutes, like mere minutes before I watched it, I didn't know anything about this film. But I just, when I was clicking play on Criterion, or maybe I looked up something beforehand, but the thing that I just casually saw right beforehand was that this film was the basis or the inspiration for The Last House on the Left. And immediately I went, oh, this movie, I didn't really know what to expect from it, but I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, same here. So for all of these films, I've been trying to keep my distance of not knowing anything about it going in. Obviously, things like Seven Samurai, you get the gist of it, you know what you got going in. For Bergman, the only thing I have in my head for Bergman is the famous scene from Seventh Seal, which is the chess scene. That's the image when you say Bergman that's in my head. This movie, I knew nothing about as well. And I was probably about like a quarter of the way through the movie when I was like, oh, let me see, like, you know, the actors and like stuff about this movie and some trivia and whatnot. And I got the same thing that you did, where it's like, oh, it was the basis for this other thing that happened with Last House on the Left. I'm like, oh, well, that's gonna inform a lot about what happens in the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, obviously expectations suddenly changed quite a bit when I realized that this in some way inspired that film. So just in case you don't know what that means, if you don't know Last House on the Left, I mean, this is probably good a place as any to give you a trigger warning. We will be talking about some rape scenes in this, and that's something that is a big driving force in the plot. As it is for Last House on the Left, that film is very well known for pushing the envelope when it comes to that type of cinema. So I came into this like with that information just fresh and like okay, I guess that's what this is going to be. And actually, you know, I won't reveal exactly how else it, because I've seen Last House on the Left, but as it went on, it wasn't just the setup and just the broad like genre. Like Last House on the Left is almost kind of a remake of this in some ways. Yeah. So, you know, we'll get into the ins and outs of that when we get into the spoilers, but you know, just to set things up. But yeah, this is a Ingmar Bergman movie starring Max von Sydow, Sydow. How do you pronounce his last name?
See, Swedish is hard. Max von Sydow is how I've always heard it said.
Yeah, that sounds right. So he plays this, basically a farmer, the head of the family. He's got a wife, he's got a daughter, and there's also this fourth sort of main character who is kind of a woman who works on the farm and is kind of looked down upon because she she's pregnant but she's not married, so they kind of look down on her for that because we're in the medieval time period. That's very much frowned upon.
Right. I did see listed somewhere, I can't remember where I saw it, that apparently that fourth character, Ingrid, is actually a half sister to Karen. So it is all part of the family. Okay. To some extent.
The way the parents talk about her never really sounds like she's also one of their kids, but I'll yeah, sure. So that is the basic character setup, and obviously something horrible is going to happen to one of the daughters, and that's going to lead into the plot of the film, which does have a revenge element to it. It does have these other things going on in it. So I'll leave it there as far as premise goes, and we'll talk about it more in spoilers. But that is the basic gist of it. First time watch for both of us. I believe this film is also the first part of what is considered a trilogy. Now, you're going to look at me, David, and think, wait a minute, how's there a sequel to this? There's no sequels to this. It's more of a thematic trilogy, I believe. I don't know exactly how they relate to each other, but I just know that there's two other movies that are kind of always bundled with this one that were made like right after it. So when we come
all of
back,
them from Bergman?
Yeah. When we come back to Bergman in like 6 months, the next one might be the second movie that's considered part of this trilogy. So we'll get into that when the time comes. But yeah, that's the gist of it. So David, I will ask a simple question. What did you think of The Virgin Spring?
So again, not knowing anything about it going in, I was very open to it. It opens in much the same sort of way as Wages of Fear, in that for the first like 20 minutes of the movie, probably more, I have no idea what type of movie this is going to be. It plays it very slow. It builds up the characters first. It gets a very just intimacy with the people that we're going to be spending our time with, so that you better understand their mental states moving forward. But once the thing happens, from that point on, it feels like, and it may very well have been, the template. It feels like this is the most stripped down version of that story, in that it just hits all of the beats one right after another. It doesn't do a lot of big like flourishes on them. It's just the template for that type of story, and it's good. It's solid. It is. There's a reason that story has managed to persist from that point forward. But I do feel, and maybe it's just because Wages of Fear and Seven Samurai were so much longer, that this one could have done a lot more with it. It could have spent a lot more time delving into each of the decisions that these characters made and like all of the actions they took or whatnot. To that extent, it almost felt a little bare bones and empty by the time you hit the second half of the film. But did I enjoy it? Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'd say that it's worthy of its place in Criterion. Obviously, it's a very well-made film, but I just kind of wish that there was more of it, which I guess is a compliment in a roundabout way.
I thought you'd be relieved to only have a 90-minute movie.
I was, but in the same breath, that doesn't mean that every movie should be 90 minutes. Some movies do need more.
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I think Bergman's direction is always very strong, and his cinematographer here, whose name I do not know off the top of my head, but his cinematographer.
I have it here.
Oh, yeah.
It is Sven Nykvist. This is the first time they worked together because his previous regular guy bowed out.
Well, he's very good, and this film looks stunning pretty much all the time. And the fact that is, you're watching it now. You're watching the HD version of the film. It's a very sharp. Everything's very stark, and I guess that goes with black and white. But the way it uses light and shadows, the opening scene, for example, has a character, Ngiri, who she is in darkness, and then there's a bit of light that comes through kind of the roof because it's morning, and it kind of hits her face, and then she lights a fire, and the fire sort of lights her face in a different way, and she keeps coming in and out of the light, and it's just it's visually very compelling, even though not much has happened yet, and you're just kind of watching what she's doing here in the morning, like what is she doing to start the story off. And it's very compelling just because the visuals are so beautiful to look at, and there's great ones. I think the thing is, yeah, it's pretty straightforward in bare bones in terms of the plot, but the way it handles a lot of those moments are very, very, very strong. There's moments where there's entire like 5-minute periods where there's no dialogue, and it's just reactions. It's subtle looks on faces. It creates mood and tension, especially in the second half when there's so much context been set up. And I'll say dominoes start to fall. It really kind of starts to all click. And those moments are handled so well. They're so beautifully directed, and they're really simply shot, but they're beautifully directed in how the actors are directed to just kind of play the moments quietly. And it's got that thing that some great movies have where you can see the gears turning in the heads of characters as they're realizing things and as they're deciding what to do next in that moment. And we'll talk about those specific instances when we get into spoilers and stuff.
So, I agree with all that. I think that every single frame of this movie is artistry. Like they managed to sell the mood via just the most bare bones of what they have to offer here. Like you said, there's barely any music, there's barely any audio even half the time. It's mostly just long swaths of silence punctuated by a conversation. Like there's not much to it in anything except for visuals to build up that emotional point to the audience. But it still does it. It still manages to sell that emotional point.
It's very Bergman. From what I've seen of Bergman, there's a lot of quiet in his films, and
and again, I haven't seen any Bergman really, but the little bit that I know about him is like, again, that chess scene from Seventh Seal, which I know for a fact is this long, pretty stoic scene where he's just holding on this chess match. It seems like this is that, but made for the entire movie.
Yeah. And our boy Max here is also the knight in that movie, playing chess with death, of course. And I'm sure that's one we'll get to down the line. Oh, yeah. So it's a biggie, after all. But I think the direction's flawless. The way it handles its tension is great. It also does have some key themes that it's playing with. The two in particular, well, that's three actually, I should say. Because you've got guilt, you've got the idea of revenge, and then you've also got religion, which is played in a very interesting way because it's very specific to kind of this part of the world, because it's very much Christianity versus Norse mythology stuff, and that's quite interesting. And it's funny when I was doing a little bit of looking up, because when I watch a movie from another place like this and I don't necessarily get all the context because I just don't know it. It's like, okay, I want a little bit of background on this. Like, is there anything to this? And it turns out this is actually based on an old, I don't know what the exact word that was used, fable or old
fairy
story.
Tale.
Yeah. Which, in the original story, it's actually about a guy who's got 7 daughters and all 7 of them are raped. And you can understand why that was condensed into a more straightforward and...
See, when I say I want the movie to be longer, that is not how I want it to get.
That's not what you meant. Yeah.
No.
I think that's fair. But it's kind of interesting that even this is based loosely on something. There is kind of an old parable or whatever that it's kind of taking from. But it's coming from a culture that isn't really, it's a more specific culture. This kind of Scandinavian area culture that is separate from, because obviously you're American, I'm from the UK, but a lot of our history is kind of tied up. It comes from similar sources, or at the very least we're very aware of the shared history.
Psh, my history started in 1776. I don't know where yours did.
I don't know, Stonehenge. I don't know. I have no idea.
Magna Carta. I don't know, somewhere back there.
I'm pretty sure Celtic history goes back a long time.
Yours started with Braveheart, and mine started with Independence Day. There you go.
What, the Roland Emmerich movie? That's bold.
Yep.
Well, one day there was a nation. The next day there was aliens to fight.
Yeah.
That's okay. Just keeping it straight. So yeah, I think the movie is right from the get-go, and when you're watching sort of a thoughtful movie when from the very first conversations, you find yourself paying attention to what they're saying in a way that's different to just I'm looking for where the plot's going to start. I'm paying attention in a way okay, this all feels like it's setting up themes. This is setting up what the movie's about. One of the very first conversations we get are the two parents talking about their daughter, and then also casually talking about Ingiri, the one who's kind of disowned for being
the black sheep,
impure, or whatever phrase you'd like to use. And immediately it's okay, this is what the movie wants me to be thinking about as we go forward into everything else that's going to happen. And it's so important to everything else that's going to happen, how they feel about things, how they feel about things later, how they feel about things after all the events have went down. Like, all of that is informed right from the very, very first, like, couple of words, or even the very first couple of shots, really, but all of it is, like, everything's important. It's a movie where all the details have been thought out. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I get every little nuanced detail, because some of it will go over my head. Inevitably, it will.
Yeah, but for sure. I mean, no, that's exactly what I was thinking. And that when I say that this is like the template of this sort of story, the most bare bones, it's because every single aspect of it, everything that was shown, that was done, felt critical towards the understanding of not only the plot, but the things that the characters do with every new, as you said, domino that falls. Every time that there's a new action reaction, it changes how people feel about other people that we've set up. And they never show something that's superfluous. That's just like, oh, and here's this random guy that we run into strictly for the character development of other people. It's always for the purpose of not only the individual characters, but the plot as a whole.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it is that I'll be blunt here. This is a much better film than Last House on the Left, and that's not to throw shade on Wes Craven necessarily. I think he's made some great movies. He's made some shit as well, to be fair, but he went on to make other better movies. I think what's interesting though is that to compare them a little bit is that I think naturally you go to an Ingmar Bergman film, you're like, okay, this is the art house take on your rape revenge movie, which is effectively what it is. But it doesn't play like a sleazy horror movie. It's very different. So you've got that like to compare them. But while I do think this has a lot more depth than Last House on the Left does, there is a very interesting kind of like overall like meta-analysis of the whole thing, which is like how that film is made and how it's a decade or so later. It's from the early 70s, and it's like after kind of everyone lost faith because it was after the Manson murders, it was after all this other stuff. Like, it's grimy, it's sleazy, and you can sort of like look at how, and they're from different countries, they're technically from different cultures, but just the feeling in the world and how it changed from the the more idealized, like we all have hope, we're all going to go to the moon, we're excited about going to the moon, and then you get to the 70s like, holy shit, Vietnam has made us all just miserable, the world is shit, and there's no hope for any of us, we're all screwed. So I wonder
though how much of that was also over in like I guess I don't know how much hope and stuff there was over in Sweden at the time.
I have no idea. Yeah.
Did they care about us going to the moon? I'm not sure.
No, I mean, I'm just speaking in very broad terms here. I don't know what I know just from a brief bit of research, like this idea of like the culture being conflicted between two predominant religions. The idea of paganism versus Christianity was very much a thing that's, in this time period the film is depicting. I'm not sure how it is now, or in recent history.
I mean, I have to assume that either most people have made their peace or whatnot. This is a very specific time where Christianity had not fully taken over as the predominant religion within this sort of medieval culture in Sweden. There was still this battle between Christianity and the Norse mythology. And as such, there's the battling in the movie, as you said, of the guilt, where Christianity is all about, forgiveness and repentance, whereas Norse mythology is a lot more hinged on that sort of revenge lifestyle.
It's about, I mean, it's not about revenge, but it's about, like showing
eye
that
for an
strength.
eye and whatnot. Yeah. Right. And I think that makes this the perfect time period to set this movie, in that you immediately get that larger theming just between the religions of this transition over from revenge to thinking, no, I should have forgiven, I should have been more repentant towards them. So I think that because honestly, nothing else in this movie forces this to be in like medieval Sweden. There's nothing here that's particularly necessary outside of that religion bit. That seems like the only thing that keeps it in that time period. To
an extent, I would say that there's a few other things that the time period lends itself to. Is one, much simpler lifestyles, and so something as simple as like how much trust someone has for a stranger. I feel like it would be harder to like take that as a serious plot point in a movie set in present day, even in 1960, versus medieval times where, accurate or not, and it may not be, maybe people were just as mistrusting back then, but because it's so far back in the past and we don't really have as much direct evidence or context for it, we can buy that people were more trusting of their neighbors. They'd offer, you know, shelter to people who were walking past and needed in out of the storm kind of thing.
Right.
You know? So I do think there's some stuff like that that's in there. And I think also, because it's an older time and you think of like the further back you go, even though this is totally not true because things were way more savage and there's so many reasons to say why things were worse, there's this idealized version of the past where you think times were simpler, and simpler then means more innocent. And because this is a film about innocence being robbed from someone, which is not necessarily how I would think of it or phrase it, but obviously that's the framing of like certainly how characters look upon young women, and how, I mean, the movie's called The Virgin Spring, and not specifically for that reason, but the fact that she's a virgin is brought up and it's important to what she's doing. You know, that she's set out at the start of the movie to like deliver candles to church because that's the done thing on this day, you know, for this time of year, is you send a virgin to go deliver candles. It's like it's the ritual, it's the thing. So the idea of promiscuity, the idea of like the expectations of a woman and all that, like it doesn't get into a super feminist side of it, but you can't not think about it a little bit, where how they're treating this daughter as an angel because she's still a virgin and because she can fulfill this role, and then this other woman who is treated as the outcast. She's, you know, she like, you know, and I think there's a lot of stuff in this movie that is very well done in how it's implied without actually stating or showing something. Something as simple as just how Ingiri feels about the situation, like right from the opening scene, we have no context for how she feels or what's going on, but as the movie kind of shows us more stuff, you realize just how poor she feels right now and how other people must be treating her that she feels this way. Yeah. You know,
she was. I mean, it's implied in this that she may have been the black sheep before she got pregnant, but it's only once she became actually pregnant that pretty much everyone just left her alone and was like treating her like a lesser being, all things considered. So then you have a couple scenes in this movie where it's just Ingiri and Karen next to each other, and you can see just from a stylistic viewpoint, from a costume standpoint, from an acting standpoint, how the audience is supposed to perceive them. Whereas the Ingiri is very, I don't want to say over the top, but like she's got more scheming nature to her. She's very more, much played she's as a negative.
She's more dramatic. Her hair's a bit more unkempt. She's got like kind of just rags on. Whereas Karen is wearing this nice, you know, embroidered dress. She's very well kept. She, you know, hair's brushed, all that stuff. Like every visual thing in the scene is telling you there's a difference between these two characters. Right. You know, whether justified or not, this is how the world around them sees them, and that's how we're seeing them as the audience as a result.
And that's what I also like in this movie, is that for majority of it, they don't do the gray morality thing. Because that's the thing, is I was taking modern filmmaking sensibilities and like expecting them back on this. So I was expecting there to be that fatal flaw in Karen, the thing that like, oh, but she's actually not as great as she seems to be. Or I was expecting that redeeming trait in Ingiri of like, oh, she seems bad, but really she has a heart of gold. But for majority of the film, they're just played straight. They're played as this one is the lesser and this one is the greater. And that's the way it is. You just need to accept that as an audience.
Well, I don't know if you accept it, because I think you are supposed to be thinking, like, challenging it. You're supposed to be thinking, of, like, should it be this way? You know, clearly, I think one of the faults of the characters around them in this film is how they look at her, you know, Ingiri, and that's why she is the way she is. You know, she is more bitter as a result of how she's being treated by everyone around her, because that's how this system here works.
See, I agree that the audience should be challenging it, but I don't think that the film posits any reason to challenge it up until the very end. I think that they want you to get in the mindset of Ingiri is this irredeemable person up until her big confession scene towards the end. And that's the point where the audience is like, oh, okay, can that be? Because if you're constantly questioning from the beginning, then you never really get into the mindset that everyone else in her family has. I think that the movie pushes you into that mindset, and only once you're firmly lodged in it does it pull you back out and say, okay, now are you sure about that?
I don't think I agree with this, because I didn't feel that.
That's
I immediately, as soon as they started talking about her, I felt sympathy for her. Like, instantly. Like, that's just like how it came to me.
And I mean, not to get too spoilery, but there is a point where I think that the movie tries to show you that Ingiri can do something that would like redeem the character, but chooses not to. And I think that that is the point where the audience is left in that, okay, she's not redeemable sort of spot until we get towards the end.
Yeah, but you're kind of speaking about her as if that's how she starts, and I don't think that's like
it's not that I'm saying she starts that way, but I'm saying that the movie doesn't do anything to argue that she is good up until later in the movie. Like there's some visual stuff to it, and like if you look at her situation, yes, you feel just empathy on it, but I don't think that there's anything that's actually saying in the movie that this person doesn't deserve this bad of treatment.
I mean, I guess you're technically right. I don't
I mean, that's just the way I was reading it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, clearly, but that's the way I was reading it.
I don't know, because like I think right from the start it shows that Karen has sympathy for her, and it's kind of this like
right. Well, Karen has sympathy, but Karen is supposed to be our just altruistic, good to everybody character. It's not. I feel like the audience is more supposed to be in the mind space of like the mother and father, where they're supposed to really, really like Karen, but really, really dislike Ingrid. And that's played through with the themes and all that of how they represent Karen and Ingrid.
Now I gotta disagree with this completely. I don't think I feel that way at all when I'm watching this movie. To me, when I'm watching this movie, and I think I feel this way about all of Ingmar Bergman's movies to a point, is that I feel like I'm watching the film more at a distance. You know, like I'm more of a distance from the characters, where right from the get-go, I'm seeing all the players, and I'm thinking about like what their purpose is in the story. It's kind of like I used the word parable that was kind of based on earlier on. I think the movie, to an extent, is kind of supposed to have that feeling overall. I think there's always kind of a moral and a lesson, and not so much that it's got like a clear-cut answer to the questions that it's posing, but more so that it's got a clear question that it wants you to think about, right? And that's ultimately the point of the movie, is to make you think about what is ultimately right and wrong about like the outcomes towards the end of this. And I think at no point in this movie was I ever thinking in the context as I'm supposed to like Karen and disliking Geary. You actually threw me for a loop when you started talking about her as if we're not supposed to like her. I never thought that once in the entire movie. There was points where, yeah, she could do something more heroic, I guess, but I never once, like, I always looked at it differently than that. I don't know, it never felt that way to me.
I mean, that's fair. I guess when you're saying like it's from a parable standpoint, that's where I'm kind of getting this from, though, is that if you go back to the fairy tales, there is never really a gray morality character. There are good characters and there are bad characters. And it's only as this movie develops that you do get into that sort of gray territory. But that's why I think that when it opens up, everyone's kind of fallen into this black or white of good and bad. And it's only once it develops do we get that little dithering to it.
I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with this.
That's fine. I mean, there's just different interpretations.
Yeah,
I
don't think I agree with this, because I actually think it's kind of... I think everyone's great at the start of the movie. except Karen. Notably... Actually, no, not except Karen. I think even she does have flaws.
I mean, she has flaws, but they're so super innocent. Like, she likes to sleep in. That's her flaw. And I'm like... Okay.
No. There's more to it than that. Like, right. I don't want to get into it. We're not in spoilers yet. But right. I think she does have, like, flaws, or at least hints of flaws that will develop into... Like, I think there are seeds in this movie that she might go down a path that her parents will not approve of. And I think that possibility, that possibility is there the entire time, and that she's too frivolous, and that she doesn't take life seriously. I actually think she's a deeply flawed character. I'm going to fight you on this.
Okay, no, I don't. I think she does have flaws as well, but I do think her flaws are able to be twisted around to be represented as good things. Like, she's very trusting, and that can be a flaw depending on who she approaches, but inherently, trust is a good thing to have.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm not talking about being too
I know what you're getting to, but I can't talk about it without spoilers. So I'm just trying to...
Look,
yes.
Fundamentally, I just disagree that this movie is about a bunch of characters who are very black or white. I think they're all shades of grey, and I think they're all shades of grey from the start of the movie all the way up until the end of the movie.
That's fine. I agree that they turn into shades of grey. I think that by the end, nobody is in either black or white. But I think that at the beginning, it does start a lot more simplistic than that.
It's simplistic, but I think at the start of the movie, and admittedly, I think it's because I'm already getting into a movie like this with an analytical eye, and I'm looking at these characters. Like, I'm already seeing flaws in all these characters. I think the parents are flawed. I think Ingiri is flawed, obviously. I think Karen is flawed. Obviously, the villains are heavily flawed. No getting around that. But... Right, and maybe they're the ones that I would say, okay, sure. Some of the villains, obviously are just irredeemable and they're just bad.
Oh yeah,
right. There's no debate in that. But I think all of the main characters, all have flaws. Even the way they treat Karen is flawed. Not necessarily in a super evil way or anything like that, but just it's flawed for reasons that sort of come up as the movie reveals itself and talks about its themes. So, for the sake of brevity, we're going to move on.
Yes, that's fine. So one thing I did want to bring up, and I wasn't paying as close attention to it as I should have. Besides the opening credits, was there any music in this movie?
I don't think so.
Yeah, because it was very quiet for very long stretches.
Outside of some simplistic stuff that is made in the scene, where a character makes music, I don't think there is.
Okay. I mean, I
don't think there is.
That's kind of shocking for me. I expected there, especially with how long of an opening, movies at this time had all the credits pretty much at the beginning, more or less. They had just this long, very light-sounding song to go over this entire opening credit scene, and then just nothing for the rest. And I was actually pretty shocked by that by the time we hit the end.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like that's not that uncommon. Not just in Bergman stuff, but even just in European cinema in general. I feel like there's a lot more art house stuff that just doesn't have music. Like, like a more modern example would be Michael Haneke's, what's that movie called? Oh God, I forgot the name of it. Hidden? Is it called Hidden? Anyway,
sure.
Regardless, it's a movie that has basically no music the entire time, and it's something that I stuck out. So I feel like that's a French film. He's a German director, but that was a French film.
Okay,
which is really messing with my brain here. He also directed Funny Games, which is a German film. And then he directed the remake of Funny Games, which was an American film, but still by the German director. Like, it's all very convoluted. The point is, what was the point? Oh yeah, music. Yes. Sometimes movies, Europeans sometimes like movies that have no music.
Yeah, and I guess that's just me as an American not being exposed to that much of it, because it's struck me as odd. I mean, I think Seven Samurai definitely used a lot of music throughout. It had big bombastic scenes. And I think Wages of Fear also had a good amount of music in it. So this was just the first one that I've really been exposed to of it being silent for the entire film.
I think Wages of Fear didn't have that much, but it did have at least enough that you didn't feel too, like, whereas this is just like, completely devoid of it outside of the opening titles. It's, I think what that does is that it helps when the tense moments happen, because it does feel like just tense. But it really lets you, like, the silence between the lines really just feels like an abyss.
Yeah,
in a good way.
I turned up my headphones to just max because I was like, am I missing something? Is there any sort of audio playing at all? But it is just dead silent for large portions of this film.
It kind of goes back to talking about kind of being like a parable in a way. Like, it kind of has that feel where it's just like, I think the characters have realism to them in certain ways, but there's also kind of this overall feel to it where it does feel like this timeless story that just kind of exists, and every kind of line is very purposeful.
If they played any sort of music, it would date the movie to an extent.
Kinda. I don't think that's necessarily the exact reason, but yeah, that's kind of in line with like the thought process I'm having here. But yeah, so it's very good. I think we'll get into spoilers now, so we can start properly dissecting things and whatnot. So spoilers for The Virgin Spring, you have been warned. So yeah, opening scene. It's Ingiri just in this dark room until you see a bit of light coming through the roof, and the fire. And notably, it starts with fire because the movie ends with a spring. The titular Virgin Spring is a spring of water. So it's kind of this bookend to the movie where it starts with fire and the water is kind of the cleansing of it at the end. Yeah. But she pleads to Odin in this scene. And I don't think I got entirely, when the scene was playing, exactly what she was asking for yet. It kind of revealed... I don't think
it says it now.
Yeah, but as we were going through the movie, it kind of obviously becomes clear what she was praying for, effectively. But we're introduced to the family, we're introduced to the parents before we're introduced to Karen. Karen, as you mentioned, she's slept in, and the parents are talking about how they want her to go and deliver these candles to the church because it's tradition or whatever. And the mother's willing to let her away with just not going, so she's a bit sick, she's a bit under the weather, but the dad's like, nah, enough of that nonsense, she's going. And it seems like he's more strict, right? And it seems like the mother's too lenient. And it gets a little bit more in depth though when you actually see when you meet Karen and you see how both parents interact with her. It becomes a little bit more nuanced in that, where he's actually quite nice to her when he's talking to her. He's clearly a very loving father. He's clearly... She's very much a daddy's girl, and he's very much enthusiastic about that. But he will be strict. And obviously, as the movie goes on, you realize that part of the reasons why the mother's so lenient is because she's actually jealous that she prefers her father, and she's like overcompensating, and she's trying to so that's obviously one of her faults that come up as the movie plays out, and it's something she specifically regrets and feels guilty of.
It's implied at a certain point in this movie that there were other children who either have died or have left for various means, and this is just the last kid that the mother has.
This is the last one that remains. So this does this job of setting up how they feel about her, which is important because obviously she's going to be this victim. She's going to be raped and killed, and seeing how much she means to these characters is an important part of the effect that's going to have on them.
And then on the opposite side of that, when the mom goes to wake up Karen, she tells Ingrid to basically make her a sandwich, more or less.
Yeah, go make Karen a sandwich now.
And that's when we get the full explanation of how Ingrid feels about Karen, is that she catches a toad, scrapes out the insides of this loaf of bread and hides the toad inside of it. This seems like it's a really thematic point, but I, for the life of me, can't figure out what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anything's specific here, like symbolism in the toad or whatever. My assumption would be that it maybe relates to paganism, or the idea of like maybe this is part of the ritual of the prayer she did is but honestly though, in the moment it just kind of felt like she got an opportunity, and this she's really petty right now. She's specifically really upset right now because they've just spoken down to her. They've just because there's a couple of old people who work at the farm, and one of the older women who that cooks and stuff. She just says something mean to her a little bit before this as well, and it kind of sets up how she's treated around here. And I think if you're looking at this movie with a critical eye of all of the characters and how they're treating one another. Obviously the treatment of Ingiri is something that sticks out immediately as they've pushed her into this corner and they've made her an outsider, they've made her different, so she's turned to something that is different, because they're all Christian, they're all praying, they're all saying grace when they're having their dinner. I thought it was very interesting visually that the first time we see them sitting down for breakfast here, the layout of the table is it's much smaller, but it's very Last Supper, with you've got Max von Sydow, the father in the middle, and everyone else off to the sides. And it's specifically important because later on, when the villains are there and they're invited to the table, they all come up and sit on the other side, with the backs to the camera. It's
right.
Very good visual storytelling.
Of just breaking that Christian viewpoint of it.
Yeah.
But see, this scene in particular is what sold me for we're not supposed to like Ingrid at this point. Like, yes, we can be empathetic towards her of saying that, oh, well, she's mistreated by all these people here. But she, without anybody else seeing, without any other notice or anything like that, to a character that we have not yet even met, she puts a frog in that person's meal, more or less. And that's the sort of thing where I was like, okay, so this is not supposed to be somebody who's like got a heart of gold and is just misunderstood. Like, she's being malicious towards people that we have not even met yet. So that's where I was getting that from.
Yeah, I guess I just don't think about it in those terms. Like I don't think this is a case of like we're not supposed to like her because of this. I think we're supposed to see, oh, this is what she's driven to. So we're going to see how this pays off later. We're going to see, where I don't know. I didn't take that as, oh, I have to look at her as a villain. And maybe it's because it's the type of movie I'm watching. Like if this was like a Disney movie, and this was a cartoon. And this was like, the evil witch or something.
She's the ugly stepsister, literally.
Like, it would come off a bit differently. But, when I'm watching this, I'm not like thinking about it in those terms. I'm more thinking about, okay, what's driven her to this? What's the motivation? How does this fit into where the movie's going? How does this fit into the theme of it? And because this is the first part of the movie and we're learning who all the characters are and we're building up, like, I was reading this as, okay, she hates how much better. Like, because at this point, I actually did think they were both sisters. It was actually later on where I kind of realized, oh, she's not, like, their daughter as well. Like, I thought she was. And then you told me that she's a half-sister.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure where I read that from, but it's somewhere.
So let's just ignore that, just in terms of terminology, because it may get confusing, right?
Yeah.
She's just Ingiri.
She's just a farmhand.
Yeah, she's just a farmhand named Ingiri. But, she hates how much better Karen's treated. Karen's treated like this princess. Where they bend over backwards for her, that's the thing, when we see the mother go and visit Karen and wakes her up, and she's like, hey, sleepyhead, get up, are you actually sick? And quite quickly it's clear that she does get away with murder. Like, she intentionally kind of jokes about being sick when she's really not. She basically says, send someone else to go send the can. And the mother points out, if I had said that, and guys, just pause right here, has everyone who grew up with their parents, orphans, apologies for excluding you here in this question, but for everyone who grew up with their parents, has every parent ever said, if I did what you did when I was your age, like, I would never have gotten away with it, my parents would have hit me?
I mean,
because I definitely heard that growing up.
Yeah, so did I, but I don't want to sound stereotypical there. Like, I guess it's just that thing where everyone has this idea that they didn't get away with as much as their kids are getting away with them, but in reality they probably did, and they just have a fake memory of it. But this is when it's socially acceptable to actually beat the shit out of your kids. Oh yeah, no, like, she would be brutalized otherwise.
Whereas it's frowned upon now.
Yeah,
quite rightly.
I mean, the fact that later on in this movie we see what I can only assume is a bath scene, and the dude is practically whipping himself with some tree branches, and that's just a normal bath. So I don't even want to know what the corporal punishment would have been.
I read that as like this is like a warrior's bath. Like, he's getting into warrior mode by doing it this way.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay.
Oh,
maybe.
I don't know. I've never seen someone whip themselves with like leaves and like branches while still washing themselves.
I just assumed that the tree branches were like clean, more or less, and he was just using that the same way that modern day would use a sponge or something.
But I don't think they like go down and like take down an entire tree every time they're going for a bath.
Okay, no, I think that had some more emotional reasons to it, but we'll get to that.
All right. But yeah, so right away, she is like this coddled child who gets away with too much. And immediately in the early conversations with her and Ingiri, and it comes up later when they run into a guy as well, but there's mentions of her dancing with someone the night before. And this idea that she is a little bit naive when it comes to men, and she keeps saying, I'll never have sex until marriage, I'm pure, yada yada yada. And Ingiri's like, yeah, well, like, we'll see how strong your will is when someone like sort of sweet talks you and like puts their arms around you. And then even says, or if someone forces it upon you. And, Karen's response to that is basically, oh, I'll just fight them off. Like, she's very frivolous about it, and obviously at this point I've already read that Last House on the Left is based on it, so I'm like, oh geez, Karen.
You're just counting the minutes at that point. You're like, oh god, every male that shows up from this point forward.
That's the thing. The first that first older guy they run into, I was like, is he the one? Like, I genuinely was like concerned, and then it turned, oh, no, they know him. Okay, which, I mean, someone can still be the Predator, but
okay, so I really want to talk about this first guy. Are we on this scene like officially now?
Sure.
I really want to talk about this guy. So I think that this scene is her basically, because Ingiri's the only one who really sits down with him. Karen goes on and rides on along.
No, that's not that. No, that's guy.
Oh, right. Sorry, I forgot there was another guy in the middle.
You're skipping a guy. You're skipping a guy.
He was just so unimportant to the plot.
He's unimportant. He just kind of represents the threat of like the male gaze, effectively.
Right.
He shows up and he seems like he might be threatening, and they get startled when they see him, but only because he kind of snuck up on them. And Karen knows who he is, and he's like, "Oh, thanks for last night, Karen." And that, which actually sounds quite dodgy, but it's clear from context as they talk that they're just talking about she danced with him at whatever thing they had last night.
Like, Karen specifically asked him if he would be able to help with Ingiri's baby. Like, she is a saint. She is just going out of her way to make everyone's lives better.
Well, I think, like, obviously, the movie wants you to care for Karen, so we feel bad, obviously, when what goes down happens. And I think part of that is her trying to look out for Ingiri when no one else does. It adds this like sort of like, it adds the layer, obviously, that it's okay, she's a good person because she's as much as she's getting away with a lot of things, and she's been a little bit of a child with how she deals with the world, right? It's fair to say she's naive, all those other things. Because she's trying to look out for Ingiri, it's like, okay, we can like her then as a good person. But it also adds an extra layer to how Ingiri hates her, because Ingiri hates how she's treated much better than her and how ostracized she is. But there's this little extra thing where it's like, but she's trying to be nice to you. She's the one person that's actually looking out for you, and it's almost like you're resenting her for being too good because she's being good to you as well.
It comes down to that sort of don't pity me kind of mindset.
Which maybe makes her just hate her more on top of everything else. Which obviously is a flaw. Hatred is obviously inherently a bad thing. Especially because obviously later on when Max von Sydow hates the rapist, you don't obviously everyone would hate him, it makes sense, but this is like an unjustifiable hate, even though there are if you peel at it and you think about it and like, why does she feel this way, you're like, okay, because everyone mistreats her this so much that if you had to live in her shoes, you probably would end up hating everyone around you as well.
I mean, to go back to the Norse mythology stuff, it's kind of that same... I mean, obviously, the Marvel movies are not actual Norse mythology, but just the way that it's represented between, like, Loki and Thor is you have the child who is beloved, the one who is propped up and all that, and then you have the one who's kind of cast off to the shadows. So it's that same sort of thing here, where Ingiri is seeing Karen basically being the Thor, and she's just like, well, what about me?
I never thought of that parallel, but that's a very good point. I love how you bring up the one bit of Norse mythology you probably know because there's been a Marvel movie about it.
I used to really be into Norse mythology back in like middle school, but since then it's just all evaporated from my brain.
That is fair. So you have this scene where it's this guy's like, even like pats her on the leg at one point, and it's a little bit like, okay, like this guy's a little pervy, but whatever. But obviously from here, I was on edge because I'm like, is this the guy? Is this the guy?
Yeah. I wonder, I've said a couple of times how certain movies like don't really work from a structural standpoint if you know the twist coming into it. But this one, I think, is perfectly made that even if you know exactly like what the twist is, it's still keeping you on edge because every guy you run into, you're just like, oh God, this is it. It's happening.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a twist because I feel like
no, it's not a twist, but like the turning point of the movie, the major plot point of the movie.
If anything, it's just a late inciting incident. Because most premises, most plot synopsis of this movie will say that this is what it's based around. I don't think they'll hide it, but you're right. It puts you on edge. It puts you on edge of every man who comes along, in a way that you think, Karen, please, like, see the danger here. Try and protect yourself.
Go back to the 90s, Karen. Stranger danger. Don't answer the door.
I think you mean forward to the 90s.
I mean, from our perspective, back to the 90s. But yes, back to the future.
Yes. In fact, I think if you were actually saying this to Karen, you'd have to specify the 1990s, because she might think you mean the 1890s or even before that. I don't know exactly. It's 14th. This was
said 14th century. This is 1390s.
Yeah. So she might think 1390s. Yeah, I have to specify. Interesting, actually. Here, something I should bring up here, actually, since we're about to get into the more skeevier parts between the creepy guy and then the actual the brothers who end up being the rapists, is that the writer of this, Ulla Isaacson, is a woman, and Bergman actually selected her to adapt the story into the script that would become Virgin Spring, because she'd previously written a novel that was set in medieval Sweden, and he was criticized for Seven Seal a little bit by some people, apparently, because of it was unrealistic, which I don't think is a big deal in the context of
Are
that
you
movie,
telling me that I can't play chess against death? Is that not something that's going to happen?
I mean, I don't think the critiques would have been about the fantastical elements. I've got a feeling it was more about the actual, the people living their lives in the medieval times.
Gotcha.
So apparently, one of the reasons why I picked her was like, oh, she's good at medieval Sweden, so she'll make it more authentic, and I can trust her script, kind of thing. But the reason why I bring that up is I do actually think it's, I think it's important to note that a woman wrote this, because it does present it in a slightly different lens and a different light, perhaps, than if it's a man writing a rape revenge movie. Like, a woman writing it does present it with a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, obviously, just having a woman make it doesn't immediately take it out of like what would be exploitation later down the line, but I think the combination of her writing this from a perspective of a woman, and then Bergman directing it from a perspective of adapting this fairy tale rather than trying to make an exploitative piece, is what really solidifies this in the art rather than the exploitation side.
Well, an interesting thing I read as well, on a couple of different articles about this, is that so Ulla, the writer, I should say Isaacson. I'm not on first name basis with her. But she really wanted to explore the Christianity versus the paganism stuff. Like that was kind of like her main interest in writing it. Whereas Bergman, apparently, his main interest was the exploration of guilt and that side of it. And I think it's interesting because they're both kind of equally there in the movie. So clearly, if he gave her notes, hey, I want more of this in there, she obviously did to his satisfaction.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's interesting, though, that those two different main themes were from the different minds that were involved in making the movie.
I mean, that's the whole thing, though, is that if you go back to Christianity before, like, the Protestant Revolution, it's all guilt. It's just guilt the whole way down. So they just blend together perfectly.
Yeah, they fit. Yeah, it's a match that's made in heaven.
Look at you with the puns in these horrifying movies.
I'm a smart boy. What can I say? Sometimes. So they run into this old guy who's at like a little windmill. Windmill.
Yes, he eats all the wind there.
Yes, but he's got one eye. And again, Karen's not really that fussed. She's ready to keep going, whereas Ingiri does start to get a little nervous. She looks at the forest, she gets scared to get into the forest. Like, she can sense something bad's going to happen.
Did this seem staged to you? It didn't seem like she actually felt that way to me.
She did feel uncomfortable to me, because it kind of then extended into being left with this guy, and then obviously where that goes, which... when I was looking, so I looked things up after I watched it, partly because of this scene, because I wanted to see if anyone else kind of thought what I thought during this scene, because obviously, so she says, I don't want to go out to the forest, and Karen says, no, I want to get to the church in time and drop off these candles, blah blah blah.
Right.
So I'm going to leave you here, stay with this guy, I'll go off on my own, right? which obviously, again, I'm thinking, no, don't go on your own.
Right.
Are you crazy? Right? But so we get this scene where Ngiri's left with this creepy older guy, and when I say creepy, he's creepy in a, like, obviously he becomes a bit pervy as the scene goes on, but he wasn't creepy in that way to begin with. He was more just creepy in kind of a normal way, I guess.
He's creepy. He's creepy in the same sort of way of, like, you ask somebody what their name is and they respond in a riddle.
Oh, yes,
it's like,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't feel like that was a complicated question there, guy, but all right.
But, you know, she's sitting in his little place, and he sits right next to her, and, you know, then he immediately gets kind of pervy here because he's like, oh, it's been a long time since a woman's made my seat narrower.
Yes, that was an exact quote.
That was the phrase. And he opens this box, and he's got basically what I can only describe as, like, because he basically implies that he could tell that she was into, you know, paganism, right? And says, oh, you're one of us, and he pulls out like this box of trinkets, and he's got like things that I can only describe as, like, I don't know, ceremonial, like, talismans, like, things like that.
Yeah, they're either talismans or like ingredients for spells.
Yeah,
something like that.
Including the serious one that I've intentionally left out to get to last is a finger. There's a severed finger in here, a human finger. I should really be specific there. So. And she's obviously getting really uncomfortable here, and he actually does go to put his hand between her legs, and that's when she finally moves. But when so obviously this is kind of saying, hey, this is like the dark side of this Norse mythology that she's kind of like tried to tap into, you know, even not in a real way. Like, it's not like, there's never an implication here that she actually knew any of this would work. You know, she prayed to Odin for something bad to happen to Ingiri, but it's not like she knew, like, she was doing something or that this was really going to actually have an effect, right?
It feels the same sort of way as, like, a teenager that's just like, oh, I'm just going to pray to Satan every day. And then one day Satan collects and you're like, oh, geez, okay.
Yeah, and I felt like this was the moment where she really got concerned that something was going to happen to Karen, because this was, like, kind of this foreshadowing to her that, oh, this, like, actually might have had a consequence. Like, this is, it's almost like someone who... not to use the Satanism, it's almost like someone gets in. What's the example I want to use? So, let's say you've got a young white man who is got some edgy attitude, right? He's a teenager, he's got some edgy ideas about the world, and he hates your woke cancel culture. So he starts befriending people who feel the same way, and then before he knows it, he's like, oh shit, I'm at a rally, and like, you know, he realizes he's surrounded by the KKK. That's what this felt like to me. It felt like she's like, oh shit, is this the type of people that I've become attached to? Right? So I took it as that. But the other thing that I wanted to, the reason why I looked it up though, to see if anyone had read this, is that I was wondering if this was actually, like, being a little fantastically implying that this was actually some embodiment of Odin himself.
Yes. So that's the point where I wanted to bring this guy up, is that you say that she ran out of the building at that point. Yes. But then when she runs out of the building, she trips and falls like a while down the road. Oh, and the guy is just already there.
It's like, it's sort of thing where it's between cuts, so it's like he could have just bolted over there, but there's also just enough of a, like, quickness to it. It's like, was that supernatural? Did he just teleport like over there? It did feel like that to me. It felt like that to me a little bit.
So then the few other things that are worth bringing up is that this guy has one blackened eye.
Yes.
Like he's only got one eye to him.
Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but Odin traditionally has an eye patch.
Yep. And then additionally, outside of his hut, his little windmill or whatever, is Raven, which is, of course, also very associated with Odin. So this is Odin. Like, I don't think there's any questionable about that.
It's interesting to me, just this maybe fits into this whole idea of these dual like religions at the time, but it's interesting to me that here Odin is effectively Satan in the context of this story, and that the idea that paganism to the Christians here in this story are like, they fear paganism like it's Satan, whereas, you know, Christianity later on, like, they have to have their own bad guy. Like, Satan is like the flip of that, but it's kind of, but in a weird way, it's part of the Christian mythology itself. Whereas here it's like, no, this alternate religion is evil and has these things, and Odin's a really bad guy, whatever.
I mean, that's, if you go back to Christianity, basically the reason Christianity was able to spread as well as it did is because they either adapted the pagan practices or they vilified them.
Well, yeah,
they didn't just let anything sit.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Christmas tree technically from a pagan thing? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the time of year. Like, there's nothing to say Christ was born in December. It's simply because it was right next to the winter solstice, and they were adapting that as the date.
Well, it's also I noticed a plot hole with that early on in my life, which is if our calendar starts from the birth of Jesus, then why is it a week after Christmas? You know, but
because the Romans.
And you just answered it, obviously, but that was something that always stuck out as a bit odd to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's the sort of thing where it's everything was adapted from the pagan cultures, like all of that stuff. So then the stuff that wasn't adapted, the stuff that was antithetical, such as other gods, were immediately made into these demonic sort of figures.
And there's something I want to make clear, because we're talking a lot about this stuff here, and I am a pretty strict atheist, right? Anyone who's heard me talk about this subject before will know I am not a believer in anything. Well, maybe Gary Busey, but other than that. But I want to make it clear here that this film works completely for me, because the movie is about how these characters' beliefs influence their decisions, and how they react to what they've done and what happens is them interpreting it through their religions. At no point in this film is it ever like trying to sell me on like their beliefs as like, it's never doing that. It's saying they're finding either fear or solace in these beliefs and these ideas, and it's influencing how they're making decisions. But it's not, it's like a good character study, and it's so heavy into like for these characters, like part of who they are, that it's, that's how it's studying. It's, if anything, this story is studying the influence of these beliefs on the characters of a time where they didn't have other ideas or other understandings of certain things or whatever.
You're informed by the people that you either run into throughout your life or are raised by. Yeah. And so these people are in that sort of transitory period where they have these long-held pagan beliefs. Even right outside their homestead is a rune stone. So they have these long-held pagan beliefs, but Christianity is being introduced. It is taking over. It is that larger thing that they've probably lived with for a few generations now. But it's coming to the tipping point of which one are you going with? And the movie, I think, entirely decides that Christianity is better than the paganist, than the Norse mythology, simply due to the idea of Christianity at its fundamental level is about forgiveness.
Yeah. I also wonder, though, if it's less so much that the movie's making that choice, although I agree that it kind of is, but is that more just because ultimately it did win? And it's that whole thing where history's written by the victors, kind of idea?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I mean, if clearly, like, the movie probably would have been a lot more standout if they flipped the script and it was like, Jesus is the worst. All hail Odin.
Because the way I'm thinking about it is that if, like, as I understand it, Satanists today, like, they're not actually worshipping the devil and want bad things to happen. It's not like that. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if you get such a thing as a modern paganist, but...
no, you do. I actually... Yeah. I dated one back in high school. Whoa! But, it was basically, like, there's Wiccanism. Wiccanism is the most modern paganist belief. But, there's all these different beliefs of... the Satanist one is more so a plea to freedom of the self, of more of like the intellectualism. It doesn't actually believe in Satan. It just more so rejects God, and it uses Satan as the standpoint for that. And then when it comes down to Wiccanism, it's a far more heavier belief in nature. Like I said, the winter solstice, the summer solstice, those sort of things are the primary driving points of nature being the fundamental thing. Again, a rejection of the singular God, but still recognizing a larger power.
Yeah, but although that said, if you are into Odin and all that, like, you get a special day every week, because every Thursday is Thursday.
I mean, Wednesday technically started out as Odin's Day as well. It just kind of got adapted. I'm pretty sure most of the weekdays are based off Norse names. Because Friday is Frida.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right, but Thursday's really obvious and sticks out because it's still very close to the word. That said, though, Wednesdays now, fans of the Addams Family get to celebrate that day.
I didn't realize that was such a huge mythology. It required its own.
It is. I mean, I can get on board with Wednesday Addams' attitude towards life.
We'll change Thursday to Things Day.
There you go.
Yep.
Friday to Gomez Day.
I want my Pugsley Day, damn it.
Cousin It Day is Sunday, I guess?
Cousins, I don't know. We're getting off track.
Yes. Honestly, there was a second there where I'm like, is Cousin It Addams Family or Munsters? Am I getting this wrong? But I think it's Addams Family.
No, yeah, it's Addams Family.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so yeah, so you got this effectively your kind of subtle Odin scene.
Odin / Satan,
right?
All mashed into one.
And it's this kind of omen for, oh, he heard her and this thing's about to happen. And obviously, I think it's open to interpretation for the audience, like how true that really is and how, like, I think you can read this scene as like we're seeing it from her perspective to an extent. So, like, yeah, we're seeing things that are clear evidence that this is really Odin, but like how much of this is her,
True.
Taking it, like, I think it's open for that interpretation if you want it that way. But but you can just read it as literal. Yeah, it's Odin, and yeah, bad things about to happen, and it's all Ingiri's fault. Which obviously, the idea of hatred and revenge, and like that's obviously what she feels guilt over later, and it's something that the movie is going to tap into. But yeah, so Karen is riding on the horse alone, and she's passing by, and these two men and a young boy see her, and they say they're brothers. I have no reason to not believe them.
Yeah, there's nothing that disagrees that point.
And it's two men, one of whom can't speak. His tongue's been cut out, so he can sort of make a noise a bit, but he doesn't really speak.
Like gurgles and grunts.
And then there's the young boy, who I don't think the young boy ever actually says any dialogue.
No, he shouts at one point, but I don't think he ever actually says anything.
Oh, you're right. He does shout. Yeah. Okay. But I mean, that's like a one-time thing. Like yeah. So, but right away, these characters like see her, and their eyes light up, like they're like, oh, who is this? Like, and immediately you're like, your alarm bells are going off, because they're seeing an opportunity, right? They're seeing this woman on her own, and they're immediately thinking, and they sort of casually walk past her. And she, being who she is, engages with them and asks them about the song that he's playing. And very quickly they invite her to, hey, why don't you have lunch with us? And she agrees to it. And this lunch scene where she's sitting there and she's like making nice conversation with them, and they're just gradually getting more and more kind of inappropriate. Especially the silent brother, who's kind of leaning in and. I do think it's worth mentioning, though, during this lunch scene, that she tries to say grace
for the food, but they're just immediately digging in. It's just kind of furthering that sort of cultural divide of, you have good Christians and you have bad pagans.
Yeah. That said, though, I mean, I don't know if these guys are pagans or if they're just...
No, I think they're just representative of, villains rather than
the other
any particular faith. Yeah.
And yeah, there's this whole thing where the silent one will sort of make a noise, and the other guy will, like, he can understand and he'll translate, and he's translating, but he's getting more and more like, oh, you have such a nice neck. Oh, you've got a really thin waistline.
He does the Little Red Riding Hood thing of like, what large teeth you have, and he's like, oh.
Kinda, yeah, actually, yeah. And it gets to the point where like she takes way too long to realize she's in danger. It's in a good way, but it's infuriating as like the audience. You're like, seriously, you're in a bad place here. And by the time she does realize and she tries to run, like, because this takes place in almost silence, where she's trying to run away, and there's like no like ambient noise, almost like you hear a couple of branches crunch as she's trying to like squeeze through or whatever.
Yeah.
But it very quickly becomes this horrible scene where obviously, like, there's a couple of shots that when it was originally released in the US, it was censored. Any shots where you could see her, as they put it, naked legs around the rapist. They thought that was too much, and it is 1960. For 1960, this is pretty extreme.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
No, absolutely.
I mean, this is the year that Psycho came out, but Psycho doesn't have. this.
Psycho is like very tense and whatnot, but it still has the over-the-top violence. This is the realistic violence. This is that scary sort of violence.
Yeah. The way these two work together, and obviously the one thing we've not mentioned too much here, other than the fact that he doesn't really speak, is the younger brother, the young boy, who of course is the innocent party of the group, because he's just with these two older brothers. He doesn't have a say in this, and it's quite clear as well that he's not fond of this. He's horrified by this. He's very quiet. He doesn't fight them on it, because I mean, ultimately, what can he do? He's not going to really succeed.
Yeah.
So
I feel like the youngest brother here is kind of representative of the idea of all it takes for wicked men to succeed is for good men to do nothing. Where it's like, yes, he may not partake in this action. He may not even like this action at all, but he kind of just, like you said, sits back and lets it happen. He doesn't even if he's unable to do anything about it, he just kind of lets it happen, and not selling out his brothers, still listening to them after this point in the movie, kind of is what damns him to his ultimate fate in the end.
That's an interesting read on it. I don't know if I would go with that angle, just because I think he is a child, and ultimately the people who take care of a child, right, and influence them, are responsible for what he's doing and how he reacts to things. Certainly while he's still young, and I think he is in a sense innocent, right? He's probably scared of fighting these two. Like, I mean, if this is what they do to strangers, there's a good chance that, like, and later on even, like, you see that he's been hit by one of them. We don't see the scene happen, but we see blood on his face, and we can see that he is probably abused if he steps out of line, or if he goes against what they're saying goes, right?
Right.
And I think because of that, I don't think I would necessarily read this as a example of, the only thing that evil takes to succeed is for a good person to do nothing kind of thing. Because I think you are supposed to read him as innocent, and I think the anger, this is getting into later stuff here, but when he meets his demise at the hands of Tori, the father, Max von Sydow's character, is the instant guilt on him, I think makes sense, because I think he realizes that, like, regardless of how present he might have been for any of this was still someone who was under the influence of the people who were raising him, and ultimately he still had a chance to turn out to be a good person. And the small things you see after the scene that happens and she's killed, because she, I think one of the most horrific things of the whole thing, honestly, is at the aftermath when she stands up and she's just like stumbling and crying, and because she stops like fighting at a certain point and is just kind of like distraught and is just
just numb to it.
Yeah, she's walking like a zombie. And that's when the silent brother goes up and like clubs her in the head with the branch or whatever it is. And like the horror on the kid's face, and then when he's left alone with the body because they want to go and like fetch their things, he looks over, and I think it's really important that we only see like the full context of her dead body just lying there motionless until we see it from the kid's point of view. It kind of, you don't really see it until then. It's kind of like left off camera. And I think on some level it's because this kid is this innocent like passenger who's like brought into this horrible world. And I think the guilt later on from Tori, like, I think there's an element of guilt for killing any of them, because obviously that's not the Christian way. You're supposed to forgive, right?
Unless you're in a crusade.
Yeah. But but I think it's the kid especially, where it's like, oh, that was going over a line where the anger overtook him and he became this like, almost this like just body of vengeance, this fury.
Oh yeah.
Kind of thing.
No, I'm not. I guess what I'm saying is, like, yes, I think from the viewpoint of the characters in the movie, he is this innocent, and that's why when Tori goes over that line, it is the thing that finally like more or less snaps him out of it. It's the last thing he does. I think that'll make sense, but I'm saying from more of your fate in the story, whether or not you get to live or not, is because of the fact that he still, like, he just sat there and let his brothers just tell the story. And I guess it comes down to the idea of, is the fear of reprisal against yourself a good enough excuse to not do the right thing? And I think from a Christian standpoint, it's not. Like, you're supposed to do the right thing because Jesus, in obviously his own mythology, is giving down the ultimate sacrifice for all of mankind's evil deeds. I think that that's the same sort of viewpoint here, where this kid didn't speak up. He didn't say anything. He just let his brother, he would have let his brothers continue doing this seemingly for the rest of their lives because of this fear of reprisal against him. But it's not a good enough excuse in the end. But from a standpoint of the characters itself, it's obvious that the mother character does see this boy as an innocent and like basically tries to protect him briefly.
And I would argue that he is as well. Like I would say that he definitely is.
Yeah, I'd say he's innocent as well. I'm just saying that's the reason why he died, though, is I think that from a cosmic sense, he wasn't.
Well, that's the thing, though. If I was reading it like you are, I would disagree on when he earns that fate. I don't think it's watching the actual assault happen.
You think it's earlier on?
No, I think it's later. Why would it be earlier? What did he do earlier?
I don't know. Just like the rest of his life before then.
No. Like, if anything, if there's a point, because one of the things you said there is that he didn't speak up. Where he could have spoke up, maybe where he could have trusted other adults, is when he's, because that whole dinner scene that happens when they're at the family's home later, and he throws up the food. He's too guilty to actually eat anything, and he spills it all over the table. That is kind of like where maybe he could like tell these people, like, who, I mean, admittedly they don't know specifically at this point, although maybe the kids realized that they're at the place of where this girl lived. They don't actually know that, but it like that's maybe where he could make some kind of amends or something. But I don't think the movie's about judging the kid, though. The kid shouldn't really be judged.
No.
In that sense.
It's strange. We'll get to it in a little bit, but there's this entire very elongated scene where I think he was like they said at one point he was a professor that just kind of retired to this farm life. And he goes on this long thing of basically instilling the fear of God into this kid. And then he's just like, oh, but don't worry. In the end, you'll be saved. Night, night.
Yeah. I think the kid, I think, is meant to be this innocent perspective of not quite the audience per se. I don't think it's quite that, but because I think the audience is more this like bird's eye view of the whole thing. But like I think he's this idea of the unshaped mind that can become either like his brothers or he can become like how the other family would raise him. You know, he can be shaped into anything.
He can become the new Karen.
Yeah, he can be. Yeah, effectively, yeah. And also, maybe you could argue there's a little bit of a parallel to he's the potentially still good person in this bad group, where Ingiri's kind of the one that's been turned bad inside this, relatively good group of characters.
Right. So as long as we're talking about that, I do want to talk about Ingiri's part in this scene.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So while Karen is being raped, Ingiri is there. She's watching from afar by a nearby river, and she picks up a rock, and as she says later, she had every intention of like throwing it and scaring the guys off, but she didn't. She just didn't do it. And that's the moment where I feel that it starts to really dip into the gray for Ingiri at the very least, in that she had this intention, she had this noble intention, but something stopped her. And I'm not saying that makes her more evil. Clearly she had the idea to do something good, but it is a very interesting point for the character of that she let her more malicious intentions stop her from doing a better thing at that point.
Do you think it's that clear cut that it's malicious intentions?
I don't think it's malicious intentions. I think that it's a lot of stuff going into it. Like, also, it's two very big guys against a pregnant woman and a small girl. I mean,
my first thought was sort of crippled by fear. Like I think the fact that she even wants to try and intervene is already showing you that she does not, like, even though she wanted something bad to happen to her at the start of the movie, and that's what she was praying to Odin for. I think the fact that she even was like trying to like bring herself to like step in is showing that there's already like some level of certainly regret, but the idea that she doesn't really want this. This is horrific what she's seeing, But it's so stark and so horrific that she can't even bring herself to get into it. And maybe there is meant to be a parallel there to both her and the younger brother, both kind of being, it's effectively just in a trance watching it, because it is just so,
it's so brutal,
it's so horrible, it's so just like crippling, with how,
no, I get what you're saying. It's something that if you put I think that's the same sort of thing with anybody nowadays, is that if you see a violent crime taking place, are you 100% sure that you would have the ability to stop it?
I think it's far more to do with that than it is about her saying, oh no, maybe I do want this, I'll let it happen.
No. Yeah. I mean, when I say that, I said that I meant in the fact of it being the smallest little part of her, of just like, okay, well, maybe this is something I wanted. But I think most of it did come down to this sort of crippling fear of, should I get involved? Is it something that's going to end up harming me in the end? Am I even going to be able to do anything to stop this? I think that it is all down to that same sort of fear that anybody in modern day would have when it comes down to these sorts of crimes.
I think it's really quite simple. It is just, she wants to intervene but is too scared to actually act on it. And that's exactly what she says when she runs into Tori later. She's terrified. Obviously, she feels guilty for the original like prayer that she made to Odin, but and she does, like, she sees this as her fault. She completely 100% thinks she caused this and that she brought this on her, and she's going to now like live with that forever. So like she again, I never once took her is this like purely bad character, because I think she's empathetic from the get-go, because you can kind of like analyze how she's being treated and why she feels this way, and then the second she actually sees the consequences that at least she thinks is her fault, she's immediately horrified by it. She there's this, and it's in the same way that Karen is kind of ambivalent and too naive to really like predict that she could be in a position like this. And Geary's also kind of naive in a different way, where she doesn't like see the consequences of wanting something like this to happen, that if it ever actually does, how she'll then feel about it and the guilt she'll feel for it, and like the horrific actions. And again, like, I would read this more of like, and maybe because it's an atheist, but like I would read this more like, this isn't really her that caused this. I know the movie's sort of presenting this idea that it is, but I would read this as more, no, this is more happenstance, but it's challenging all these characters and how they treated her and how they felt about each other, beforehand. So, but no, I mean, I think honestly, this is actually going way longer than I think I thought this conversation on this movie was going to go.
Yeah.
Because we're still only really done the first half of the movie at this point.
This rape scene, it fades to black pretty much exactly at the halfway point.
There's a small moment where when the kid's left on his own and he can't stand looking at the dead body, he goes to throw some dirt as if he's going to bury her, but then he kind of backs out of that as well, and just runs away in fear. So I think what's so great about the next little chunk of the movie is that when it cuts to Tori and he's standing there in that great coat, and in the doorway of his farmhouse, and you don't realize that the bad guys are like standing at the gate. There's a good like minute goes by just on him, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like when it first cut to him, I was thinking, oh, he's waiting for his daughter to come home. Like, it's weird that she's not back yet, and he's waiting, and it's got this mood. And I think what's so great is that it's a long time before anyone actually brings up that she's missing, because it's not until him and his wife are in bed, I think, like, or getting ready to go to bed, where they actually say, hey, I'm sure, she's spent the night in town before without permission. It's probably just that again, like, she'll be back tomorrow, nothing to worry about. He's trying to like comfort his wife. But that, that takes place after we get the bad guys like begging for a place to stay for the night, him agreeing because he's trying to be a good person, him inviting them up to the table for dinner, the kid getting sick and like, spilling the soup or whatever it is all over the table, them being left on their own to sleep in there. Like, all of that happens, and it's like, I mean, it's not a long movie, but it's a good 10-15 minutes before anyone actually says anything about the missing girl. And I think what's so good about it is that entire time there is a mood to Tori, but certainly the wife Maretta. Like the entire time, she seems like something's bothering her, and we know what it is. As the audience, we know it's because she's not here. But they do it without ever actually saying it until like the next scene happens a good chunk later. And I just think that's great.
Yeah, I think it's a great job, because if they set up this idea of, they immediately come back and they're like, my daughter should have been home by now or something like that. And then they go through all the same beats as they did of letting these guys in, letting them take their thing. You're just going to be thinking about the fact that they're thinking about their daughter. Like, the fact these guys are here is kind of inconsequential. Like, it doesn't matter the fact that they showed up, because they're more focused on their daughter at this point. The fact that they open it with the guys allows you to get into the character mindset of them saying, oh no, we're focusing on these guys. We're letting them in. We're building them up as a thing. And so then when they do the reveal of, by the way, we are talking, like, we're thinking about our daughter's safety as well, it lets both of those coexist a lot better in the script than just one or the other.
Yeah, and you just know that other movies like this, and I'm not saying Last House on the Left does this, because I don't remember. It's been a long time since I actually watched it. But certainly I can see a modern movie doing the same plot, but having a line here where he has to say something about the fact that his daughter's not back yet, like immediately. Like, they'd shoehorn it in right away.
I would say the thing that would happen would be they have him sitting inside, something like that, looking morose, looking like he's waiting for something, and then the doorbell rings, or he hears a noise outside, and he jumps up expectantly, thinking that it's his daughter, and it only comes to these three guys at the gate. But instead, like you said, he just stands there, like all like bold and proud in his cool coat for like a minute and a half.
Well, and it's not even that what you just said there would necessarily be bad. It's just that this presents it in a way that feels more unique, and it feels more like it's very thoughtful. There's a lot of thought. Every shot in this movie has thought behind it. It feels like every single thing is very considered, like how to present each moment, what to show, where to have the camera, the lighting of the scenes, like all these things feel very, very considerate and intentional. But this especially just feels like, no, we're actually withholding this idea of like, are they worried about her? Like, it feels like they are, but they've not actually said anything yet. And then you realize, no, like, she is worried about her daughter. She is worried she's not here. But they're not going to burden these strangers with this story when they arrive. It's going to be something they keep internal to a point.
I guess I also wonder from the perspective of the audience who didn't know how, I guess, culture was back in medieval times like that. Like, would you be worried after a day? Would you be worried after 2 days? How long is normal for a child to be out during this time period?
That's true. That is very true. Especially since, that they're riding on horseback, and they mention the town's a little bit far away, and they want to make it before nightfall.
But they explicitly also say, like, she's done this trip before. And they were originally planning on having her go completely alone. It was only that Ingrid got roped in at the last minute.
Yeah. So, by Karen's request, no less. So, yeah, it's I think it really presents the mood in this chunk of the film. And of course, there's that great moment when they're leaving this like dining area where they're leaving the strangers to sleep, right? So the bad guys are going to sleep in here with the kid. And there's a moment where like the cook or the maid or whoever it is, whatever her title would be, she goes and like she sort of moves one of their bags out the way, and it's like a really tense little moment because we know that they stole her dress, like Karen's dress. They ripped it off her body after she was dead, which also felt quite what's the word I'm looking for?
I would say dehumanizing is the word.
Dehumanizing, yeah. Like brutal was the word in my head, but it's not brutal. It's just different than that. Yeah, dehumanizing is a good word, but it just it felt really uncomfortable and just kind of like, oh, they're still in, and you're like, oh, they all know she was wearing that. They all saw her. They all commented on it in the morning. Yep. So it's going to be it's a smoking gun. It's as smoking as a gun as you can get that they have interacted with their daughter, and the fact that obviously when they see it later properly, there's blood on it. That's going to raise some questions.
Yeah, just a few.
So it's a really cool little moment where you're like, oh shit, and you feel like everyone, like the bad guys hold their breath for a second, like are we going to have to like start like fighting here or what? And of course it's when the wife goes back and she's walking around because she can't sleep. She hears scream, right? And I know I've skipped over the weird scene with the guy talking to the boy.
That's whatever.
Yeah.
It's honestly, that scene does not play any real importance to the plot. It just kind of drives home this Christian faith that the family has.
It does, but I mean, obviously it was hard to remember everything this guy said because it was this big long monologue. But the one thing that stuck out to me was that he talked about how, like, you could be standing near the fire. He's basically talking about like a void, but it's kind of like he was talking about a volcano almost. And he's talking about how, but don't worry, because if you make the right choices, you'll be, whisked away, and you'll, and it kind of like tied into the fact that the movie started with fire and ended with water, but it also ties into this idea that this kid is in the belly of the beast because he's with these two, horrible people. He's trapped with the evil effectively, but he could like escape, he could get away, and which I think also feeds into the tragedy of like he doesn't get away though, because the fury that is incurred because of his brothers ends up taking him out as well. But yeah, so the brothers have like hit him, and the wife hears this and she goes to check, and while she's there, the main brother who can speak pulls out the dress and says, "Hey, this belonged to my sister and she was murdered. I thought I'd give it to you as a gift." And the silence as she's contemplating what to say, as she's looking down at this, knowing exactly what it is it may be the best moment in the whole movie, as far as just like getting into the audience's skin and just being like, okay, you've got me by the balls right now.
I do wonder if, because obviously that he said that it was his sister's immediately outs him. I do wonder if the same sort of righteous fury would have come down on them if they said, like, we found it, or we bought it off someone, or something like that. Would it have... The fact that it is so clearly a lie means that they are lying, but if it were something that were, maybe someone else had their hands on it and was a middleman before them.
Well, that would bring it into a different theme almost. That would be... skepticism and like trust and things. That would. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad thing to do, but it would definitely take it into another. Like we'd have to have a whole other act to the movie, like with them trying to discern,
trying to suss it out.
Yeah. But no, it's a good point. Like, yeah, this makes it very clear. But I almost think I like that, and it's the same way you're talking about how some of these characters are very clear cut in what they represent in the story. In a way, this like them being evil and being this blunt and like not even. Like they almost at their own demise as their own like evil. Like it's like them trying to just immediately
they could have very easily have just left this place the next day if it wasn't for this. Like basically they were just trying to capitalize, because it seems like they were he was offering it as a gift, but it was kind of an expected trade more or less, because the mother then says like, let me see what my husband says to offer you as a reward for such fine clothing. So it seems like he's just trying to capitalize even more on this evil deed he did, and that's the part that gets him caught up.
Yeah. So it wasn't enough that he raped someone and murdered them. It's now he has to profit from it as well.
Yeah.
So like that is like a really well done moment. It's really good. And then the other thing is that before they went to bed, the husband even implied that he might have jobs for them, so they might have even stuck around working here. Yeah. And I think before, obviously the dress was the smoking gun. Which I thought was ultimately going to confirm it. But what I was thinking might happen here is that Ingiri might come back, and because she witnessed it, I thought she was going to see them, and then her penance, like her sort of basically turning good, effectively, or trying to redeem herself, would be like going to Tori and like confessing everything. And she kind of does that as well, don't get me wrong, but it's after he already knows like that they've done something bad to his daughter. She gives him the details, of course, because she has those, but I thought like she would be the thing that turned, or maybe they gave the suspicion, and then the dress would be the confirmation. It would be the like, oh, she's telling the truth. This is really what happened. But that's just me, like almost overcomplicated with my modern movie brain of like try to see more twists and turns.
I don't even think that's even overcomplicating it. I think that it makes more sense from just the plot perspective that's how it would happen. You have someone who's very clearly a witness, who has every reason to return back to this place. It would make sense that she would be the one that confesses it. It's kind of even more strange that the dress is the thing that gets it in the end.
But I'm glad they did, though, because all those moments are so exceptional that Like again, this clearly came from a creative place of like how to tell a story.
just the scene of the mother keeping a completely straight face as she's presented the dress. She exits the building and then just collapses. And
you can tell. This is the moment I was talking about earlier when I said you can see the gears in the head, where you know she knows what this is. She's having to fight not to like reveal that she's suspicious of these guys, because then she might be in danger. They might, try and kill her quickly and run away if they think they've been, caught in the act here effectively. So she's having to hold it in, and it's such a strong moment of a performance, of tension, all these things. And then, like you say, she gets out and she breaks down. And there's a really nice little touch here, actually, is that after she breaks down, before she walks away, she sort of like stops and turns back and like locks the doors. There's like this the big bar, that goes into the slots. And she goes and, obviously we cut ahead a little bit where she's like explained the basics to the husband, to Tori. And one of the things he stands up and he starts like getting stuff out, and she's like, "What are you going to do?" And he's like, "Well, first I'm going to lock that door." And she's like, "It's already done." I thought that was a really neat little choice here. The idea that she already did the first step that he was going to think of. It was almost like saying, at the start of the movie, they were almost competing in a way for their daughter's like attention and affection, but here they're in sync. Like now they're in unison, like because of this.
It's a thing where it's both of them know something is about to be done, and seems like the wife is more or less willing to leave it up to the husband of what are you going to do about this, but they know that at no point in any plan that can be developed is it they walk away without us saying so. They don't get to just decide this for themselves.
And they don't sit down here and talk about should we have revenge, because it kind of goes against our whole like Christianity values. No, they know they're going to do it, and the questions don't arise until after they've already murdered the bastards. Like, that's the sequence of events here, pretty much. But we have this moment where he's gearing up, he gets his sword out, and he goes outside, and he's sort of like almost about to go or maybe do something, and then that's when Ngiri's kind of stumbled back on, because she's had to walk back, obviously, on her own, and she starts, I don't even know how the conversation starts exactly, but like she starts.
He sees her like hiding underneath the stairs. He grabs her out, and he's like, "What did you see? You're gonna tell me everything that happened to my daughter." Yeah.
Which makes sense because obviously she was with her, and she's like, "Oh." She tells him everything that happened basically, and specifically lays it on thick. This was me. I did this. I prayed for this. I hated her, and obviously at this point she's a blubbering mess almost, and like wants to repent for what she's done. She feels so much guilt, and I think it's really notable here. And this maybe goes back into the idea of like how at the start of the movie I was saying she feels this way because in some part of how everyone around her is treating her, and in turn treating Karen. And how they're making her feel like she's the lesser because she maybe she made a mistake. She had a one night stand with someone, or whatever. She's it's something that from a modern perspective we're looking at and going, "Oh, they're being awful and sexist by treating her this way." But I think it's very notable here that Tori doesn't like blame her. He doesn't like start hitting her. Yeah. He doesn't say, "Oh, you'll die with them because you did this." He immediately is just like, "You clearly want to do something about this. Prepare my bath." And I'm like, it's like he's getting ready for war. He effectively includes her in like, okay, I'm going to do something about this.
It's this weird transitionary scene where obviously before this point, Ngiri was very heavily on the side of like the Norse pagan stuff. And it's only here that she comes back around to the Christian asking for forgiveness and repenting side of things. But in the exact same scene is where we go from generally nice guy of the father, who doesn't seem to really have much of a care in the world, fully flipping the script and going back to the blood will be shed.
Yeah, he's full vengeance. Mindset. He goes full vengeance. Yeah, instantly, and he goes and like pulls down this small tree. And starts hacking at it.
So yeah, that's the scene that it's very well shot. It's just one continuous shot of this lone tree in a field, and he's just wrestling it to the ground. And what I feel like this scene is supposed to represent is the fact of he knows that he has to like plan this out. He has to like think about how he's going to do this. And this is just letting off all of that immediately needing to release steam so that he is able to think even somewhat clearly, because obviously he is filled with a murderous rage at this point.
Yeah, can I also go a step further here and say it also represents him cutting down his current, like, this is literally, in a sense, him tearing down his, like, not values, I don't want to say values, but, like, tearing down his current beliefs and shedding them so that he can go and be the old vengeful, like, Norse, like, you know, knight or whatever. Like, you know,
yeah, entirely possible. I mean, this wasn't like a massive tree. It was a birch tree, they said, and it didn't seem like it was too old. But what I think normally happens, because as you said earlier on in this review,
just before you go any further with that fits into this idea that Christianity is relatively young. So this is a relatively young tree. It's obviously been growing for a while because it's, you know, it's tall enough, it's strong enough that he's struggling to pull it down, but it's still possible to pull it down. Whereas, you know, most trees you can't just pull down, right?
Right, exactly. But as you were saying before in this review, is that, you know, you don't think they tackle a tree down every time that they want to take a bath.
No, of course.
I do think they go through and they, you know, they chop down these branches and they use them as some sort of cleaning. I'm not entirely sure on the process. I Googled it, still couldn't find anything. But I do think that they use this sort of thing as like a cleaning process. But he just went full tilt and was like, no, this entire tree is coming down because I just need to get this out. I just need to get this rage. And the fact of he had a sword, I'm sure he has an axe somewhere. But regardless, he used neither of them. He just tackled it down.
Yeah.
I think that's the purest expression of rage you could really get at this point in the film.
Yeah, and he puts on his old, you know, presumably whatever war there was in his lifetime. You know, he was a fighter in there, and he puts on whatever his old uniform was, and he goes into this room, and they're all asleep when he goes in as well.
He specifically tells Ingiri to get the butcher's carving knife as well. So it's got like a bone handle with like a seemingly like a boar etched into the back of it. It's a very scary looking knife, but he carries it around the whole time.
Yeah, and he, you know, the guy who can't speak, the mute one, fights him back first, and he obviously, you know, and there's not too much to this, but you can feel, because it is again just silent other than the sounds of the struggle, you really feel the awkward like fight of it as he's like,
yeah, this doesn't feel like it was heavily choreographed. It doesn't feel like there's an entire elaborate fight scene. This feels like two guys outside the back of a bar, and they are going to fight this out.
Yeah, and then of course the other guy he goes after as well, and ultimately wins. And the big point is, of course, when he turns and he sees the boy, and the boy tries to run, and he picks him up. It's almost like Bane picking up Batman, the way he picks up the kid. But instead of doing the whole backbreaker thing, he just throws him to the wall, but the kid like hits right into a shelf. So you presume that he's hit his head, and when he looks down at the kid is basically already dead. Yeah. And this is where it kind of like hits the guilt starts to really properly form of like, oh, not only was all of this technically against all the beliefs that we have supposedly had since the start of this movie, the kid especially was this step too far.
So there's three things I just want to cover in this scene.
Go on.
First of which is the methods of killing. Each of them are different. The first brother is stabbed, and he attempts to stab the father back with his own knife, but the father wins out on that one. The second one puts up far more of a fight, but in the end, he's actually burned, which leads into this whole furthering idea of violence is
fire. Yeah,
fire. Like it's all, you know, all the pagan stuff is
you're right.
represented by fire.
He lands on the fireplace in the middle of the room. Yeah, you're right.
And then when it comes down, the second thing is that the boy himself, the mother almost tries to protect the boy from being killed by the fathers. Like she tries to pull him back when the father's going after him, almost wordlessly saying like, no, this boy didn't do anything. He's innocent. Don't let him be killed for it. But in the end, as we said, the rage won out in that regard.
And I almost sort of read that as well for a split second. She was almost like, let's adopt him, and like this is like a second chance, and like and it's kind of a noble way, not just in like I want another child way, but in a we can make him a better person by raising him properly. But the fury, the absolute just warpath that he's on at this point, it's like, no, there is no stopping here. There's no half measures.
Yeah. And then the third thing I wanted to bring up is, like you said, the guilt sets in right afterwards, to the point where he's on his knees and the first words out of his mouth is, "God, forgive me for what I've done." He immediately recognizes this was against everything he should have been doing.
I think it's kind of a beautiful way to look at it, is this idea that they could have taken this boy in and made a better future, but instead the vengeance side of it like ruined that chance. And it's really making it clear that the like, you can debate all day if they should have given in and killed the two adults who actually raped and killed their daughter. Like, most of us are going to be like, technically it's not the right thing to do, but most of us are going to be all right with it. We're going to understand it. We're going to be like, yeah, we get it. But the kids kind of is this step too far. And yeah, so the end of the movie is them going to find their daughter's body, right? So they all go together, and Geary's there. All the other people who live at the farmhouse go with them.
This is where the mother, like, basically flat out says, "This is my fault. I was always jealous of how much she liked you more than me. So this all comes down to me." And the father basically responds with, "Only God knows where the guilt lies. Like, that's no longer up to us. He'll decide on Judgment Day. Yeah, but right now we're just handling this." But
more just on what the mother's saying there is this idea that she thinks it's her fault because of how she is maybe coddled her too much, let her away with things. The idea that she's not, like, I mean, she specifically thinks that God's done this to her because as a punishment for not raising her properly, kind of thing. But I think in a sort of more larger context of like analyzing the characters and the surroundings, like maybe she coddled her too much, so she wasn't prepared to like recognize the danger, or she wasn't prepared to do what was necessary. But yeah, so they get to the body, and obviously they weep, and there's a great sort of monologue from Tori where the camera's very not pointedly one shot, and it's all from behind him. So he's on his knees looking up, and he's sort of basically. He ultimately basically says that the only thing he can do to repent for what he's done and for the vengeance that he's caused is that he can try and make things better with his own hands. So he says, "I'm going to build a church. I'm going to build a church to make up for what I've done, and hopefully like win your favor and whatever." So
there is one line though that I just love, because it sums up, I think, basically the entire Christian crisis of faith. Is he kneels down and he just says, like, "I don't understand. I don't get why you have let this happen to my daughter, but I'm still gonna pray to you anyway." Like, he recognizes that whatever, as a man of faith, whatever plan God has that involves the rape and killing of his daughter, he doesn't get it. He's never going to understand what kind of God can let that happen. But as a man of faith, he still has to beg for forgiveness for his shortcomings regardless.
Yeah, I almost read this, and again, maybe this is just my reading from my perspective, but I almost kind of also felt it was a little bit of a, like, this is like almost like a paradox, if you will, in the faith itself, and that he's acknowledging it, but ultimately, partly because of the time period perhaps, but these people need some form of faith. Like, they just can't function without it. So he kind of almost has to just admit that he's glossing over effectively this problem with it, because they need it. They need some form of guidance. They need some form of like comfort to feel like all is not lost. And so the thing that kind of happens at the end here is that when they move the body, this new spring of water starts to like come out of the ground. And it's basically this supernatural little moment. It's almost like God saying to them, "I've heard you," and this spring represents like the future. It represents the innocence of your daughter that you lost, and your repentance. And notably, like they all weep and stuff, but and Greenie specifically starts to wash her face and hands with this water and drinks from it, almost like she's, baptizing herself.
Yeah, that's this whole thing. It goes back to the idea of baptism.
Yeah. So, and that's basically the end of the movie, is them looking upon this miracle of like their daughter's dead, but maybe in her place, literally the titular Virgin Spring has spawned. It's it's a very well directed film where it's rich with all of these ideas that are motivating these characters, and it is very much about these religious sort of back and forth. But much like we were saying earlier about how the director was even more interested on the idea of guilt and rage and violence. If you sort of ignore, and you shouldn't completely ignore the religion thing, but if you have to put that to the side for a second, if you look at it just on that idea, just the idea that like the revenge and the violence and the anger just leads to bad things in this movie. Right at the start of the film, and Greenie is jealous and angry, and she wishes for something bad to happen, and something bad obviously does happen, and she's now going to live with this guilt forever, thinking that whether she's right or wrong, she's going to believe that she is responsible for this, and that's going to basically haunt her forever. The revenge of the parents leads to murder, but it more specifically leads to the murder of an innocent boy as well. Like the idea that hate and revenge only breeds more hate and revenge. It never, the whole eye for an eye thing doesn't work. The eye for eye, everyone goes blind. The old sentiment. But it's very much showing you that throughout this film, that anytime even the good characters take rage and take revenge upon something, even if we see it as just, and even if they see it as just in the moment, it still leads to bad. It still leads to something else. So
I do wonder, because I think that this is where the blending comes in perfectly, is that guilt always comes from within. Like, it has nothing to do with their religion. The guilt comes from the actions that they perform and just the moral code that they hold themselves to. Whereas forgiveness for that guilt, getting past it, moving past it, always comes from without. Like even the idea of Ingiri, the least related to religion, is that she professed her guilt towards Tori, the father, and he's the one who forgave her. It was never a thing where she found forgiveness within herself. It was always from without. So I think that's where the religion aspect really comes in. It's like, yeah, we all feel guilty about like these different things that we've done, but in the end, you need to find something on the outside to get your forgiveness.
Yeah, it's almost an examination of why people turn to religion, especially in older times where they need, because people often say it's the desire for answers, but here I think this is maybe hitting more on something that I think is even more true, is some people, they feel guilt, they need to feel that sense of forgiveness and that someone is going to forgive them, and if no person is going to forgive them, and in many cases no person can forgive you for certain things, they need something, a higher power to give them some sense of forgiveness. So at the end of the film, and Tori is saying, I can't understand or accept why you've let this happen to my daughter, he still needs to feel forgiveness for what he's done though, which is why ultimately he still has to just accept that he needs this. He can't just shun God and forgo it. And that's very much because of a film of its time. Not so much the time it was made, but more the time it's set in. But yeah, so yeah, needless to say, it's very good.
Yeah, I think we got that across at some point in the middle here.
Well, I mean, obviously the last two movies we did were very long, so we were never going to beat the runtime of those. But
no,
I didn't necessarily think we were going to be longer than the movie for this one, though.
No, but I mean, that's the thing with each of these movies that we do for this show, is that they bring up these deeper themes that still resonate nowadays. And I think that's kind of what sets them apart as classics, is that it's never just a thing of their times. It's something that always manages to hit no matter when you're watching it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously many things have changed since the time period this movie's set in, and indeed some things have even changed a lot since when this movie was made.
Yeah.
But these core things that it's dealing with is the looking down upon a woman who is sexually active, right? Who's not married, right? Even something as simple, and obviously Tori's never presented as a bad guy or an awful father or anything, But
No.
you can't help but notice that, no one's allowed to eat until he's sitting at the table. He's very much the head of the household, and what he says goes. It's a very old school kind of thing. So this idea that he maybe feels extra guilty about everything because he feels that he's supposed to be the one protecting her, and
right.
It's almost
but even then, you go back to that scene where he's sending his daughter out to the church, and he's immediately giving in to her just tiny requests the entire time.
Yeah.
So he's not this hard and fast head of the house. He is willing to listen.
Yeah, but but if anything, you could argue he might even learn the wrong lesson from that, in a sense. But
like he'll crack down more on his gut feelings.
But the point I was more getting to though is that, this idea of like critiquing, like, or the idea that some of the guilt is also, or not the guilt, sorry, but some of the critique of the story on the characters is the pressure that's put upon some of them in the roles that they're supposed to fulfill. So in the same way that when you're examining, let's say, I don't know, the rich versus the poor, and it's like, yeah, obviously the poor are worse off, but there's also these examples of like how someone who's rich has these other pressures that can manifest differently, right? I think in the same way, you look at a character like Ngiri, and it's very obvious and plain just how mistreated she is and how that manifests and makes her this better character. Alternatively, though, while clearly he has a better life because he has a position of more power and a position of more respect, there is this pressure to be the ultimate protector of everyone around him and his family. There's this pressure to be making the hard decisions. There's all these things that do make things a bit more difficult in different ways.
There was that conversation right like when they were talking about where their daughter is, where again the father was just more or less playing it off. He was like, "Oh, she'll be fine, everything will be fine," and the mother specifically says like, "Where would we be if I acted like you? If like nobody worried about this sort of stuff?" And it's obvious that this aloofness, this sort of like go with the flow attitude that he seemingly has in the beginning, is kind of the downfall here, at least from the viewpoint of they could have done more.
And it's a bit of a flip as well, because the first couple of scenes with them, it almost feels the opposite, where it feels like he's the strict one, because he's saying, "No, get her up and send her out." But then he doesn't actually enforce like the attitude with her. The wife goes and enforces his will on her, and then he comes in and gets to be the good guy by saying, "Oh, I love you, daughter. Have a nice trip and give me a kiss before you go."
He seems to be very aware of the responsibilities that everyone has, and he tries to uphold that. But as soon as anybody gives any sort of like different ideas, he's open to it as well, which is not an inherently bad thing. He recognizes the current structure and he says, "Hey guys, we should probably be doing this." But when somebody else comes up against him, he's like, "Yeah, all right, sure, why not?"
Yeah. So it's a character study for sure, and the characters kind of represent these larger ideas.
They're all archetypes of the role they are.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So no, and honestly, I just compare it to Last House on the Left for a second. Like, I was actually obviously I expected there to be the rape revenge element of it, but when the characters actually go to the family's house, like and they're sitting in the house with them, I'm like, oh shit, this is actually kind of really close, like much closer than I was even thinking earlier on. To the point where some people have accused Wes Craven apparently of just ripping off this movie, and I can't really argue, to be honest, because it is pretty one-to-one in a lot of ways.
See, that's the sort of thing where I always question when a film is the first of its kind, because this is pretty much the first rape revenge film, if you really want to boil it down to it. How much of it, if it is enough to spark its own genre, how much of it can really not be labeled as ripped off, Like, if you go back to, like, silent films and stuff like that, when it's, Trip to the Moon or whatnot, the first, like, sci-fi films, clearly the things that followed after it are going to pick up on some similar elements.
Yeah, so, this is a lot more than that, though.
Oh, no, absolutely. But that's only because we've gotten so niche in our genre. It's like the fact that rape revenge is within itself an entire genre.
But I think that's the point, though. When this was made, it's not supposed to be a new genre. It's supposed to just be this story on this own. Right. Whereas I would argue that what you're sort of comparing it to there is the larger idea of just science fiction. Like, while I don't think, like, a trip to the moon when they're making that in France in like 1902 or whatever it is. I don't think they're thinking, oh, there's someone's going to like redo this or whatever. But I don't think they're also like, I think when they're making that, I think they are dreaming of like going further with it constantly. So therefore there's a natural assumption that other people are going to do even bigger stories about getting out of space, right? That's the idea that there's an obvious expansion to it. Whereas I don't think when Ingmar Bergman's knocking out the Virgin Spring, he's thinking, I wonder how someone will do a revenge rape plot in the future. Like,
I mean, I guess the problem being is that with a plot like this, that can be done again, can be done differently. You can have like different setups to it, as is obvious with Last House on the Left, still having a different primary setup to it. At what point does it cross that border between just expanding on it to ripping it off? I guess that's the real line I'm trying to draw here, is how much, when you're making something that's brand new, either you expand upon it with later iterations or you rip it off. And there's somewhere in there is the line, but the question is where.
I guess it's just a gut feeling more than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I don't know. Like, I'm not like, well, I can kind of see the argument that he just ripped this off. Like, I don't necessarily think it's a big deal, though. Rip-offs aren't actually a problem to me. Like, lots of movies get ripped off, and sometimes rip-offs can be quite good. Sometimes they're not. It's a sort of thing where, you know, I think we brought up when we were doing Seven Samurai that, like, A Fistful of Dollars that was just effectively a remake, a Western remake of Yojimbo, and Kurosawa straight up like said that when he saw A Fistful of Dollars. He's like, wait, I made that movie already. you just redid it. And I think, I don't know if Ingmar Bergman ever saw or commented on Last House on the Left, but I suspect he would probably see enough similarities. But Last House on the Left wouldn't be the last one for sure, though. There's definitely many that followed. And some that tweak it a bit more. But I think what makes it so specific to this one, though, from Last House on the Left, is that just how, like, structurally it's the same. It's split into two halves. The second half is going back to the parents of the victim, and then there's like a smoking gun like item. I don't even remember what it was in that movie, but there's like an item that like lets the parents realize that they've interacted with my daughter, and then, like, you know, it comes out, and then it becomes this revenge thing. And Last House on the Left is definitely an exploitation, you know, schlocky movie. Like, that is what it is. And it's got its place. But, you know, in a greater sense, like you say, you can sort of analyze the climate in which that was made and how that showed that times were different from 1960 and how cultures maybe from the different countries as well differed.
Right, yeah.
But, yeah, so, but it's just this, you know, it kind of is. Like, having seen Last House on the Left and watching this, I'm like, yeah, it kind of ripped it off. But you know what? He built a good career on it and then went off to do more original things. Like, Nightmare on Elm Street is pretty goddamn original, okay? Like, that was Craven, so... Clearly
you haven't seen the second film in this Bergman trilogy where it's exactly...
Holy shit. If this next Bergman movie we do in a few months' time is a guy who kills you in your dreams, then I'll be... Yeah, there'll be some serious discussions being had about Mr. Craven.
It's a Swedish rhyme that you have to stay awake or else it'll get you. Perfect.
I'm not concerned, but no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with like taking elements of, like, you know, George Lucas took stuff from Kurosawa.
I mean, that's the same sort of thing of just basic plot structure, like Hero's Journey, stuff like that. Everybody reaches back towards that cultural normativity that we just have ingrained in us. We expect certain things from stories, and it's how you tweak it and to make it your own that is the defining characteristic of it.
Yeah. I think the thing is, though, is that when something legitimately kind of new, and I think at the time this was legitimately a kind of new, even though it's based on something, obviously, like, I think as a movie,
fable,
as a film, this was like a new type of film. And, you know, I read that people were walking out at the premiere. You know, it was banned. I think it was banned in Texas, I want to say.
I mean, I guess.
So, you know, like, clearly it ruffled some feathers. It was this, you know, provocative new thing at the time. I think when you have such a new, unique structure and new, unique idea of a film, when something came out and copies it so directly, it sticks out more than someone just doing the basic storytelling principles of stories that have been around in books of since 1,000 years ago, where it's almost sold that we can't even trace the origin of some of the ideas and concepts. But it's the same, like, Die Hard comes out. Yeah, there's a lot of Die Hard ripoffs where it's terrorists take over a location, maybe a building, maybe a boat, maybe a train, maybe whatever, pick your thing, right? But it's clearly all Die Hard ripoffs, and that's fine. We accept that. I mean, is Last House on the Left really above been called a ripoff? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. But it is. I always love whenever there's that delineation between, even as we said before, art versus exploitation. Like, if these two movies were the same exact plot, I think we would still label this one as art and the other one as exploitation, just by virtue of who made them.
Well, yeah, but it's not because of who made them. It's because we know who they are and what they bring to their films.
And I think climate and all that as well, yeah.
Like, as we started off this review with, this film is like chock full of clear themes. It's got a message. It's got questions it wants to ask about revenge, about violence, about religion. It wants you to think about these things, about the roles of all these characters in the story. It's a think piece. It wants you to think, and it had me thinking the entire time. Whereas Last House on the Left is about shock value and about the catharsis of the revenge after the shock value, and that's fine. Like, that works, and I'm not downplaying that, but like, I think this is clearly more of an artful film, and part of that is down to just how elegantly it's directed, because it is elegant. It is so confident in everything it's doing, with its lighting, with its framing, with its performances. Whereas, Last House on the Left is this 16mm grimy little movie that makes you feel like you want to take a bath afterwards, which isn't, again, inherently something that is a bad thing. Like, if it's going for that, you feel filthy after it.
Yeah.
Whereas this feels more tragic. You feel more sad about what happens here, as opposed to, I feel like I was rolling around in the grass myself, like right next to everything that was going on. Like Last House on the Left.
I will say, though, some shots in this did, like, especially during that rape scene, it made you feel just the visceralness of it. Like, it wasn't so much a dirty feeling as much as just you were repulsed by it. You feel like
a voyeur who's not consented to seeing it. Like, I don't want to be watching this, but you're seeing it anyway.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that was our 2+ hour conversation on The Virgin Spring.
Woo. Guess go into the ratings then.
Yeah, hopefully some of that was good somewhere. I'm not convinced it was. I think we babbled.
I think we made many good points, and if someone wants to just transcribe this for their film class, you have our permission.
Imagine someone actually references us in like a dissertation, like.
Oh, I'd love it.
Yeah.
Someone with no credentials.
As the scholars of the Male Fuzz Movies YouTube channel. But that's the thing, though. Like, you do get actual, like, proper essays, video essays on YouTube now. It is not entirely unlikely that some people at this point have cited. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brain fart. I've been up a long time. Okay, I'm tired.
You're good. You're good.
Right. That some people have cited a YouTube video by now and credited it. There's probably rules of how to, because the big thing in university, you have to do the Oxford referencing system, all that bollocks.
We have IPA over here.
I'm sure there's like a set of rules now for how you credit a YouTube video.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The timestamp and everything.
I mean, there probably was at the time as well, even when I was writing stuff in university. But
it was probably just an adaptation between how do you credit a film/video and then also mix in the website format as well, and just mix them together.
Probably. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, rating for this film. I mean, like I said, I liked it. I wish there were more of it. I wish that it wasn't just 90 minutes. But I do think that being able to make every shot, make every scene, make every line matter as deeply as it did is something that's sorely missed nowadays, in that with just them fluffing it out to 3 hours for absolutely no reason. I think that this does a fantastic job of telling the story it wanted to tell. It looked great. It, again, has these larger themes that, even with as bare bones as it is, go so deep into their exploration that it takes us longer than the movie just to talk about it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one up there with Seven Samurai. I'm going to give it the 9.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I was doing some thought on this after I watched it, and I think I'm going to land on an 8.5.
Okay.
It's an excellent film. We've sat here and praised it. It gave us so much to talk about. We get into debates about what certain things meant. And the good thing about a movie like this is that while we debated quite harshly about how we felt, neither one of us is necessarily right or wrong. There's definitely room for the interpretations there, and the fact that it can get us talking so much and getting us comfortably talking over the runtime of the actual movie itself without really skipping a beat. There was barely any tangenting in there. Is a testament to how much it does make you think. And if you actually stop and consider the characters and what the movie's saying, there's a lot to really dive into.
Yep.
And it's beautiful, and that's consistent with what I've seen for Bergman. The quiet contemplation of really getting the characters. That's very Bergman as well from the other ones I've seen. So I'm excited. I was excited to watch another one today. I'll be excited to watch more when we get back to more Bergman. And we will hit the ones that I have seen at some point, but at least the first few we do, I think I've just this is an excuse to see some of the ones that I have not. So
sounds good to me.
So clearly it's making the cut. I think that's fair to say.
Yep. Now, is it a cut above?
I don't know, because
okay.
Well, no, I think compared to what we do in the regular show, it obviously is.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But compared to the other Criterion movies we've done,
no, I get that. I get what you're saying.
Is there an argument that this is just a slightly lower upper tier for Criterion movies?
If we're classing it within specifically this show of the collection, I agree. I think that this one is making the cut very comfortably, but I do think it is just shy of a cut above. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying it's anywhere close to cutting it close. It's right. It's just comfortably high up in the making the cut. I'm just thinking that if we're setting a precedent that the scale's slightly adjusted for this show, because let's face it, a lot of them would probably just easily slot into a cut above.
I was going to say, I feel like it would take 3 years for us to get to cutting it close.
Very
based
possibly.
off of just luck and running into them.
So I will say, let's just say it makes the cut.
Makes the cut.
And leave it there. But
it's like half of a point shy of making it up there. But
that's that's I'm trying to think of like a subcategory just for this show that's I don't know, worthy of the cuts.
Works for me.
I don't know. So it's about
collector's cut honorable mention.
It's above making the cut. It's under a cut above. It's worthy of the collection. It's I don't know. I'm just
workshop it.
It's whatever. It's fine. The scale can stay the same. But there you go. That is our thoughts on the Virgin Spring. Hopefully some of that was of interest. Hopefully it's made you think about the film a little bit if you watched it yourself. And if you haven't, obviously we recommend that you do. If that wasn't obvious.
Obviously it's on Criterion Channel, as all these probably will be, but I also found this one just totally uploaded on YouTube, so.
Yeah. It's... Yeah, not everything we do will be on the channel itself because of they don't always have the rights digitally for all the actual releases they've got. But yeah, I think all of them so far have been on the Criterion Channel.
Okay.
So that's good. So yeah, this has been the Collector's Cut, the collection for the month, our Criterion show. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Coming up next month, we'll be doing something. In fact, our first film in English out of all these Criterion movies. Probably, well, I wouldn't say it's our most well known. I'd argue Seven Samurai is actually even more well known. But 12 Angry Men is what we're doing next time. This
is the first one I've already seen.
Shocking. Yep. Well, is it the original you've seen?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. But yeah, so the original 12 Angry Men from the 50s is what we're doing next month. But yeah, So and hopefully you've enjoyed the content. Obviously, this is something that goes out for everyone monthly. But we also have some monthly bonus shows on our Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. We have the opposite of this show on there, which is called Collector's Cut Extra Reels, where we do So Bad It's Good movies. Well, hopefully, anyway. It's the worst of the worst. If this is the best of the best, and the artsy, that's the worst of the worst, and the shit to the shit. So, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we did a Neil Breen movie this month, so...
Yeah.
But we've done some gems on there, in a sense. But yeah, there's also the bonus episode every month that loosely ties into whatever the main show is doing, of course. So, for example, we did Fast and the Furious movies for one season, so the bonus episode was a movie called Biker Boys. So you can expect correlations like that,
as loose as they may be.
Yes. So yes, go get the extra content and support all the stuff we make and ensure it keeps coming. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and in the words of Martin Scorsese, this is cinema.